One of the biggest travesties to happen to this industry is the refusal of players to adapt to motion controls. I will never understand this. There are millions of people that effectively held a middle finger to precise motion controls in favor of aiming with a stick. The fact that first-person shooters thrive on consoles is something that will always shock me. Now, I'm not going to tell you that motion controls are perfect, but I think what happened here is that people let a few bad experiences cloud their judgment. We've come a long way from the Power Glove and iToy. Just look at the Steam Deck. Valve incorporated so many fine-tooth options to adjust the gyro sensitivity and trackpads so that everyone can set the controls to their liking. Does it take some effort to get the settings just right? Yeah, it does. And that might be a tall ask from a predominantly lazy audience that just wants to boot up a game without messing around in the options menu. But if you want a plug-and-play experience, Nintendo offers that with the Switch. So many people are quick to judge Splatoon as a shooter for children just because of the visuals. But Splatoon's secret weapon is the gyro sensor. With gyro aiming enabled, you can use the thumbstick for wide movement, and you can tilt the controller for fine movement. It's easier to stay focused on enemies and track them across the screen just by gently rotating the controller, instead of flicking the stick and hoping the egregious console aim assist sticks to your target. So in reality, Splatoon is one of the better console shooters because it doesn't have aim assist, which means you are forced to play at a higher skill level because aiming is more important. It's not left to some artificially intelligent algorithm bullet magnetism garbage. Is that the kind of experience you want with controllers? Aim assist in every shooter because thumbsticks can't offer the precise control you need? Apparently, yes, that's exactly what the public wants, because consoles like the Wii slowly faded away from popularity because the supposed hardcore crowd viewed it as a toy for children, just a Mario and Zelda machine. Nothing to take seriously. Oh no, we'll stick to PlayStation for our mature competitive games. Even Sony and Microsoft tried to get in on the action with the Move and Kinect, which received almost no support because people were unable to distance themselves from the supposed gimmickiness of these devices. These motion controls are used for more than just dancing games. They give you a reason to play games on consoles. They elevate experiences beyond what a normal controller or a mouse and keyboard can offer. The Wii Remote represented the pinnacle of motion controls. So many incredible games heightened by what precise aiming can offer. Mario Galaxy, for my money, the best 3D Mario game, still plays better on the Wii as opposed to its Switch port because the accuracy of the Wiimote blows the Joy-Con's gyro sensor away. Rail shooters, sadly a dying genre, were given a second wind on the Wii, which resulted in some great games like ports of House of the Dead. Resident Evil had a pair of really cool rail shooters, and of course my personal favorite, and one of my favorite games period, Sin and Punishment Star Successor. But the public wasn't convinced. They thought motion controls were a gimmick, which meant the beauty of the Wii Remote was abandoned in favor of traditional controllers with less accurate gyro control. Gyro controls that most people don't even care about, because the stigma still exists that motion controls are either a gimmick or that they're imprecise. Which meant that Sin and Punishment 2, a gift from the gods, completely flew under everyone's radar because arcade game design fell out of favor once the public realized they could watch 20 hours worth of cutscenes instead of actually playing a game. This is a masterpiece, full stop. A game so good that simply the act of moving around and aiming is a complete and utter joy. And the Wiimote puts in all the work here. The aiming is perfect. Your cursor is right where you need it to be. There's no lag, no aim assist, just an extension of your arm mimicked in this game world, so that if you ever make a mistake, it is 100% your fault. There's no question of why you got hit. There's no input queuing to compensate for slow attack animations. The game runs at full throttle, non-stop, because it is designed with the Wii Remote in mind. You can use a traditional controller, but with a game this fast-paced, whose scoring system is reliant on keeping a focused aim, why would you surrender the pitch-perfect accuracy of the Wii Remote? And before you think I'm exaggerating just because games like Skyward Sword felt a little bit finicky with the Wii Remote, games like Sin and Punishment 2 and Trauma Center played like a dream on the Wii. Not every game felt appropriate with motion controls. I'm not saying motion controls should exist for every game under the sun. but some games definitely benefited from their inclusion if the motion controls were implemented well. Trauma Center and Sin and Punishment are challenging games rooted in arcade game design that are extremely easy to pick up and play. You don't need to warm up to the controls, you don't need to memorize any complex movement, and you can play in short bursts. It's as simple as it gets, which means the games can demand fast-paced play without feeling overwhelming. This arcade game design also means that Sin and Punishment is a game that anyone can enjoy. You can credit feed the entire way and just enjoy a casual run with its generous checkpoint system. Once you're familiar with the levels, you can go for 1 credit clear. Then the real challenge comes from gunning for a high score. Getting hit drops your multiplier in addition to losing life. But the dodge has a generous invulnerability window, so getting hit never feels cheap. Most rail shooters don't offer you the kind of mobility you have here, which is part of what makes Sin and Punishment so special. It's still a memorization-heavy game that comes with the genre, but quick reflexes can compensate for poor stage routing. With Radiant Silvergun, by the same developer, you're almost forced to learn how to score if you want to survive, because in that game, scoring influences the speed at which you level up your weapons. If you're underpowered by the mid-game, you wind up timing out every single boss, and in a shmup, the more time an enemy spends on the screen, the longer you're in danger, so you basically forfeited your 1 credit clear if you didn't understand the scoring system. Sin and Punishment 2 is nowhere near as punishing if you just want to clear the game, but the depth of its scoring system is still a very high skill ceiling to reach. Performing feats like killing an entire wave of enemies or killing enemies with reflected projectiles rewards you with medals. At first, using your melee attack to deflect projectiles seems like a neat scoring gimmick, but as you play more of the game, you'll come to realize how many boss attacks can be deflected. Some attacks that look like they have to be dodged can be parried, which can make boss fights go by much quicker, and the speed at which you kill the bosses determines your bonus score, so the game rewards you for playing aggressively and parrying these attacks, which adds a layer of risk versus reward to the scoring system, because it's safer to move away from the danger zone than to stand your ground and attempt to parry. Sin and Punishment is by no means a popular competitive game for scoring, but just for your own enjoyment, getting a high score on a stage feels so rewarding. Speaking of rewarding, the way shooting works is you have both a manual aim and a lock-on. However, lock-on has a specific purpose, and that is to redirect reflected projectiles. You don't want to use lock-on in most situations because locked-on shots deal less damage than manually aimed ones, so lock-on becomes a versatile tool rather than the de facto aiming method. You want to use it in situations where you want to focus more on dodging attacks or when you want to smack a missile like a baseball at your target. It doesn't define the game, which is a trap that a lot of console shooters fall into. Certain console shooters rely entirely on lock-on, and it really depends on the game whether or not the decision makes sense. For something like Metroid Prime, the focus is predominantly on exploration, not action, so incorporating a lock-on to deal with enemies makes sense. When you consider the alternative is aiming with a thumbstick, the lock-on means you're not fumbling to kill enemies while you're trying to jump around. The goal was to make traversal smooth, and lock-on helps make that happen, at least until it got ported to the Wii and incorporated incredible free aim with the Wii remote. Then you've got something like Dirge of Cerberus, which is an action game that relies entirely on automatically locking on. Combat is absolutely the focus here, and when the combat system is so ludicrously broken that you can just strafe to deal with every single enemy, what's left? The cutscenes?
Pushed by a soldier in red.
The first Sin and Punishment was a console shooter that functioned similarly to its sequel, locked-on shots deal less damage, and considering this thing came out on the Nintendo 64, it plays remarkably well, which proves that even without a mouse or motion controls, you don't need lock-on to make a competent console shooter. You can force the player to rely on skill alone to triumph over these boss fights, which makes the gameplay feel so much more rewarding. So what makes a good boss fight? Is it something that needs to be challenging? Does it need to test a specific skill? It depends on the game, but on a most basic level, a good boss fight is something that's memorable. There are many ways to achieve that feat, so Final Fantasy XVI relies on spectacle, Dark Souls relies on challenge, and the only enemies in Shadow of the Colossus are the bosses. Sin and Punishment's bosses run the gamut from dead in a few seconds to pain-in-the-ass run enders, but what makes them so memorable is the variety. You've got bosses that you need to fight up close in melee combat, some you need to reflect their projectiles, some have several transformative phases, some chase you throughout the stages, and some are completely stationary and test your projectile dodging ability. And just when you think certain bosses are a pain because they drag on for too long, you replay the game and start deflecting these attacks, which opens up weak points you didn't know about. And sometimes destroying a boss's parts will change their behavior, and not always for the best. The last boss of Chapter 5 goes berserk if you destroy both of its shoulders, but if you just destroy one, it becomes a lot more manageable. But the trade-off is you miss out on score and a faster kill. Little choices like this make boss fights so much more interesting. In Chapter 6, you've got this boss you can only see in the rearview mirror, which I find absolutely hilarious. And you fight him indirectly. You need to line him up in your mirror and detach train cars so they crash into him. Then once he's dead, he spits out his offspring that kidnaps your girlfriend with a crane, and now you've got to slowly raise these platforms up so the lava can engulf him, and at the end of the chapter, it's a one-on-one fighting game. The creativity here is second to none, the whole way through. It never lets up. But the real showstopper with Sin and Punishment 2 is the level design. I don't just mean the theming, I mean how the stages are laid out. Each stage is deliberately set up with tons of popcorn enemies so you can max out your score multiplier early on. The scoring is kept simple. You don't need to worry about chaining enemies, you just need to avoid getting hit to maintain your multiplier. Then when you get better at survival, you can try triggering the secret medals. This is classic arcade game design. Radiant Silvergun has the dog secrets, and this first stage does a great job at teaching you how to play without holding your hand. If you hit these little enemies against this bird boss, they will roll like bowling balls to strike for huge damage. This boss dismounts his plane to fight you in melee combat, and you can reflect his sword, but you aren't forced to use melee reflections to kill these bosses. The game merely offers you opportunities to kill them quickly, and it builds up to this boss towards the end of the stage, where you need to kill it with reflected projectiles. This is something you'll have to master for a lot of the later bosses, so the game forces you to learn this mechanic before you can finish stage 1. Later on, you get this Panzer Dragoon's Via style stage where you're riding a hover car, which removes your crutch of being able to move vertically, and the stage is designed around this limitation because there are mines on the road that you need to either dodge through or jump over. These are well-realized, polished levels that don't recycle ideas or enemy designs. Even the final boss gauntlet at the end, you'd think it'd be a repeat of earlier bosses, but no, they're all brand new. This is the kind of attention to detail that you get with arcade-style games. But the one major flaw here is that the game is too long. A full run of Sin and Punishment 2 runs over 2 hours, and probably closer to 4 for someone like me that sucks at the game. But even over 1 hour would be long by the genre standards. Staying focused for that long, with such a fast-paced game with almost zero downtime, is exhausting. Chapter 6 alone is almost half an hour long. Half an hour of uninterrupted gameplay and wall-to-wall boss fights that will kick your ass. And the game knows it's too long because it allows you to save and quit between chapters. So my preferred way to play is through chapter select. Just pick whichever chapter you're in the mood for and practice it over and over until you get it right. It's still a ton of fun, and there's no lengthy commitment. I know complaining about the length of a game might sound silly to someone that loves 80-hour JRPGs, but when you consider the fact that arcade-style shooters are meant to be played for score, that means you wind up resetting your runs constantly when you make mistakes, and dying 90 minutes into a 2-hour run is soul-crushing. Growing up, I wasn't a big fan of shooters. I loved the PS2 era of Ratchet & Clank games, and of course Metroid Prime is a masterpiece, but for the most part, I never got too into the genre. Online multiplayer shooters never held my attention for long, and I kind of wrote off the genre for a while until I discovered Cave. Espgaluda 2 got my foot in the door in the world of shmups, and by extension, I became interested in rail shooters, which led to me checking out all the great games on the Wii. Sin and Punishment 2 was a game I frequently saw on Walmart shelves for like $5. Nobody wanted it. It sat there collecting dust for years before I finally decided to look up what kind of game it was. Now here we are almost 15 years after its release, and I've played countless incredible shooters, from Akai Katana, my favorite game from Cave, to PC classics like SWAT 4, and still, Sin and Punishment 2 brings the kind of uniqueness and variety that I can't find anywhere else. And with a control scheme that never once gets in the way, seriously, the Wii Remote defines this game. The first game is also incredible, and I know I didn't talk about it much, but that doesn't discount that it's still a top tier shooter. But the sequel's improved controls elevate that experience. I'm not gonna pretend like motion controls are perfect, and they're certainly not suited for every game, but for a short while we were getting incredible arcade games at home thanks to the Wii. Nintendo, more so than any other console manufacturer, has been great about giving you a reason to buy their hardware beyond performance. But here we sit almost 8 years into the Switch's lifespan, and the only thing people want out of its successor is more power so games can look and run better. But I mean, if power was the only thing that mattered, why wouldn't I just buy everything on PC? And I do. If I'm gonna buy a console game, give me a reason to own that console. The 3DS had 2 screens, a 3D depth slider, a camera, a microphone, a gyro sensor, and a touchscreen. Sure, not every game made use of each feature, but the option was there for the devs that wanted to try something new. There existed so many cool options to play games, but the wider gaming audience made it clear that they don't care. People hated how Dawn of Sorrow had touch controls to finish off the bosses, so the recent port removed that cool little mechanic, and that somehow made the game better? So now we're left in a world where every game is homogeneous, they all play the same, because that's what people want. VR is clinging on for dear life, struggling to attract an audience that just isn't there, and that's a real shame, because without any innovation, this industry will become stagnant. You can port and remake Resident Evil 4 all you like, but for my money, the best way to play it is still on the Wii, a 17-year-old port. Maybe the stigma against motion controls and arcade game design is what makes these Wii games feel so special. We won't get games like this anymore. But man, imagine if we did.